Namaste, my friends. Welcome to our Sutra class once again. We will begin with our invocation. Yastyaktvā rūpamadhyam prabhavati jagataha anikadha anugrahaya prakshena klesharashihi vishama vishadharaha anikavaktrasubhogi sarvajnana prasoti bhujagaparikaraha pritaye yasya nityam devo ahishaha savo vyat sita vimalatanuhu yogado yogayuktaha yogena chittasya padena vacham malam sharirasya cha vaidyakena yopakarotam pravaram muninam Patanjalim pranjaliranatosmi Abahu purushakaram Shankhachakrasidharinam Sahasrashirasam Shvetam Pranamami Patanjalim Srimate Anantaya Nagarajaya Namo Namaha Patanjali Mahabhashya Charaka Pratisamskritaihi Manovakaya doshanam Hartreya hipataye namaha Bhashyakrit sutrakrit chapi Nirmalantam surupinam Dhyataram Shripatir Nityam Patanjalim Namamyaham Om Namaste, my friends, once again. We are now discussing the sadhana pada of Patanjali's Yogasutra, and we are in the section where Patanjali has introduced the Kleśa-s, and he starts telling us that how we have to deal with the Kleśa-s. The last two sutras that we discussed, te pratiprasavaheyaha and dhyanaheyaha tadvrittayaha, tells us that the best way to deal with the Kleśa-s are often when they are very tiny, when they are very small. Now the next sutra, Patanjali is actually telling us almost like a warning. Why we have to deal with the Kleśa-s? That's the beginning of this sutra, Klesha Mulaha. Karmashayaha drishta adrishta janma vedaniyaha. Now, before we go deep into this sutra's word-to-word meanings, I'd like to tell you that there is a logical sequence of events that are following. Any action that is done in our life follows this particular sequence. Jnanam, Ichcha, Kriya, Phalam, Ashaya. Normally this is how it is going. The first is what is called Jnanam. There is some knowledge. For example, we hear about a new cinema that is coming, or we hear about a new restaurant that is opening, or we hear about a new shop that is going to open. This is what is called Jnanam. We hear, we gain knowledge about something. Now that Jnanam, that knowledge is creating a desire, a wish, Ichcha. It says, I want to do this. I want to go to that cinema. I want to go to that shop, etc. That Ichcha, that desire, is what stimulates an action. Action does not come without an Ichcha, without a wish. So that is what is called Kriya or Karma. It allows us the possibility of the action. So we do the action. Now that karma, that action, has a consequence, phala or vipaka, one of the two words. Patanjali uses the word vipaka in certain context. Some other people, they call it karma phala. Patanjali says karma vipaka. The consequences of an action. So that movie is either good or bad, or that shop was good or bad. There is a consequence. We enjoy it or we don't enjoy it. That is what is karma phala. Now that consequence leaves a feeling, ashaya. It leaves a feeling that remains. That is what is called ashaya. There is some leftover feeling. Now that leftover feeling will influence the next action with this, or the next knowledge with this, etc. It can feed the cycle all over again, all the way back to what is our knowledge about something. If somebody says, oh, you should go to this shop, or you should go to this movie, this ashaya will influence us and saying, no, that's not a good place, that's not a good movie. So it influences our understanding, our knowledge of such a thing. Now, normally this is okay if the knowledge is based on clarity. That's why Patanjali says, Kleśa Moolaha. If instead of knowledge, which is based on clarity, the chain of actions are coming from the source of Klesha. Because remember, the fundamental Klesha is avidya. Lack of knowledge, wrong knowledge, incomplete knowledge. And therefore, asmita, raga, dvesha, abhinivesha. So if our actions are not based on clarity, but based on kleshas, klesha mule. If our actions are based on kleshas, karma ashayaha, the consequences of the karma, drishta adrishta janma vedaniyaha. This is the most troubling part. Drishta janma vedaniyaha or adrishta janma vedaniyaha. They are known immediately. Vedaniyaha. It is known. Drishta janma vedaniyaha. It is born immediately. The knowledge or the consequences is known immediately. Or the consequences are not known immediately. Adrishta janma vedaniyaha. That means it can manifest much later. It can manifest much later. And that is the danger. Sometimes when the consequences are known immediately, it's okay. Then we can immediately relate the consequence to the klesha. Like for example, I am angry with somebody in the street and I punch them. So my action is based on klesha, that is anger, frustration, dvesha. So I am punching them because they drive very badly. Now immediately they get out of the car and they punch me back. The consequence is known immediately. The feeling is known immediately. I have no problem because I can say, okay, I punched him, he punched me back. So there is a correlation. But suppose the correlation is not so immediate. We do something now. The consequences are known much, much later. For example, I punch this fellow. Now he does not punch me back. He just carefully notes my car number. Now, I go on my life. 2 years happen, 3 years happen, 4 years happen. Now later, when I'm least expecting it, suppose he creates a trouble through somebody else because he is a weak fellow, he does not have the strength. So he watches my route to my office every day, he's watching which direction I'm driving. Then about 6 months later, he arranges for a hitman to beat me up. Now I don't have any connection. I forgot even about that accident that happened long ago, that I punched this guy, and I don't recognize these people who are beating me now. I say, why are you beating me? What is your problem? Because I'm not connecting the dots. Because that Kleśa karma that I created, I acted based on my aversion, my anger towards this person. It's not going to go unresolved. It is going to have consequences later. It is going to have consequences later. We may not connect the dots. That's why Patanjali is warning us, my friends, that please try to act as little from Kleśa-s as possible. Because if you act from the Kleśa-s, the consequences will be known one day or the other. In the Vedic tradition, we have a very famous saying, Prarabdha karmaha bhogat eva kshayaha. Once you initiate an action, it will not disappear until the consequences of such actions have actually taken place. So if you create an action that is based on Kleśa-s, it is only going to become quiet after its consequence has been fully manifested and expressed. This is very, very clear in the Vedic tradition. There are very great discussions about this topic. Topics which are so fascinating. Acharyas like Vedanta Deshika and Ramanuja and others have discussed this in great detail. They say that today you can become enlightened, and therefore from now on you are acting without any influence of the Kleśa-s. No problem, my friends. From now on your actions will not have those consequences. But all the actions you have done before today, when you are not enlightened, when you are still basing them on Kleśa-s, they will have to have consequences before they disappear. So even if you are enlightened, tomorrow you may have challenges that will be very difficult for you to deal with because you did some actions based on Kleśa-s. So that's why enlightenment does not mean you are free from the actions of past Kleśa-s. That's what Patanjali says here today. Drishta adrishta janma vedaniyaha. It's a very fascinating topic. Sometimes the consequences of our actions we don't see immediately, we see it later. A lot of people I meet one-to-one for yoga therapy are people in their mid-40s, sometimes in the 50s. And they did drugs when they were very young, very severe drugs. And when they were young, their body could manage it. And then they quit drugs because they realized it was not very good for them. And then they come to yoga, spirituality, and other fields. Now, because they do yoga for 20 years after the drugs, they think that all that they did when they were young is no more going to have an influence. Patanjali says, "I am sorry to disappoint you, my friends. Those actions will also have consequences. Those actions will also have expressions that may influence later." That's why some of these people, they have some neurological problems that come later, memory loss problems, the body and the mind start to become separated, there's dissociation, etc. That may not come when they were younger, but it comes when they are much more older, when the body starts to become weaker, and so it cannot handle the effects of some of the steps that they initiated in the past. So that's what is called adrishta janma vedaniyaha. Some actions that are coming from kleshas, their consequences are not known immediately, they are seen later. And when we see it later, there is no connection between this and that. Suddenly the whole world changes. Suddenly the whole world changes. We say, "Oh my God, what happened?" Patanjali is very careful in using these words because Kleśa-s are very subtle creatures. They always don't act at the conscious level, they act at the unconscious level. That is what I told you. I meet some students and they have had some trauma. For example, some women have had trauma with some men when they were very young. And they develop an aversion towards men. They develop a distrust towards men. Now that, even if they try to suppress and forget, it starts to manifest more and more later in their life. And they seem to have continuous problems with men, but they are not able to connect the dots that that's because of their unresolved trauma at that stage. That's why Patanjali always says that we have to resolve these things as and when it happens. For example, apologizing for our mistakes, it's best if it's done immediately when we notice it. Otherwise, it builds. For example, in a family dynamic, a brother and sister may be having some fights and arguments, and one of them dominates the other using power of will or power of physical strength. And that remains unresolved. The person who is dominating does not apologize, does not confess. That is purely a klesha, ego. Now, every consequent action will somehow be colored by this incident. 20 years later, 30 years later, when all these incidents have been forgotten, maybe the brother and the sister, they go through their own lives, they come back, meet, maybe at the time of their mother's death or father's death. And then there is certain decisions to be made. Those unresolved things will still start to play. That is what is adrishta janma. It manifests at this moment, which is not resolved at that moment. Perhaps if that problem was resolved at that time, and the people had really apologized to one another and resolved this conflict, then things would become much more easier. And this is very, very important to look at it from both sides. The person who dominates must apologize immediately. And the person who is receiving the apology must receive the apology. Sometimes I have seen people, they apologize to others. But the other one does not accept the apology and keeps the issue pending, and that starts to influence every consequent action. And then later, when there is no connection between the actions of this moment and that, suddenly this manifests in a very big way. That is what is adrishta janma vedaniyaha. I see it in so many cases in my own experience with my family members. I've seen with my students' experiences with their family members and all this. Sometimes some people find it difficult to apologize for the mistakes they make. Sometimes people find it difficult to receive the apology from the other. Both are Kleśa-s influence. The person who finds it difficult to apologize is finding it difficult because of Kleśa. Either it is dvesha or asmita or abhinivesha. The person who finds it difficult to receive also is coming from a place of Kleśa. And that's why when we base all further actions based on this Kleśa-s, when we say actions, it is kaya, vacha, manasa, through our body, through intentions, and through words. It starts to function from the place of Kleśa-s. The manifestation of such actions, the consequences of such actions, the feelings of such actions will show either immediately or later. Sometimes later, and there may not be any connection between this and that. That's why, on behalf of Patanjali, I urge all of you, my friends, including myself, that it's better for us to somehow recognize our Kleśa-s and remove it from our actions and its consequences. So if you have to apologize to somebody, please apologize. If you have to offer consolation to somebody, please offer consolation. If you have to receive, please feel open to receive. Don't reject when somebody apologizes to you. And also, most importantly, like my father used to use this phrase, don't carry the none. That means don't carry pending issues. As far as possible, let it go. My father always used to say this. Every day we eat food, the body absorbs what is nourishment and eliminates what is waste. The same with our experiences in life. We have to receive what is nourishing and eliminate what is waste. If we don't eliminate what is waste, it will accumulate and clog up our system and create consequences later, which will be very difficult for us to deal with. That's why this sutra becomes very important, my friends. Klesha mulaha karmashayaha drishta adrishta janma vedaniyaha, because not all the time we are able to see the consequences of our Kleśa-s immediately. And like I said, some of our Kleśa-s are coming from a subconscious place. In the last week we discussed this. Many of our Kleśa-s are not even coming from a conscious place, they are coming from a deeply subconscious place. And that's why it becomes very difficult to recognize, because we don't even realize we are acting from that place. Some other person is needed to show us that, hey, we are acting from a place of Kleśa-s. That's where a teacher comes in, a well-wisher comes in, a psychotherapist comes in, a counselor comes in, a mentor comes in. Because sometimes we are not able to see our own problems because they are so deeply part of us. Sometimes we cannot ask family members these things because family members, they have their own agenda. If they like us, they will want to support us, so they may not help us see our problems. They will nourish our problems. Or sometimes if they don't like us, if they have their own agenda which is against us, they may say something that is not accurate to harm us. So that's why we need to go to a neutral person like a mentor, a counselor, a therapist, a teacher, who is able to show us that some of our actions, some of our decisions is coming from a place of Kleśa-s and it has consequences. Yoga philosophy says no action is without consequence. Every action has consequence. Every inaction also has a consequence, because the inaction is also an action. If somebody is hurting and I refuse to help, even though I can help, it's an inaction, but it is an action because I made that choice. I made that choice. And this is very, very important for us to remember. That's why we need some references. Now please remember, this can not only work for Kleśa-s but also for positive actions. I would like to share an example of this with a positive action before going into other dimensions of this sutra. Many years ago, I had to be dropped in the airport because I had a trip. And at that time, my father and my mother dropped me in the airport. And I was traveling with my wife and daughter at this time. And my mother and father drove the car with us to the airport. And they let us there. Now my father always had this habit of coming with me all the way to the entrance of the airport as far as he could come because of his love and attachment to me. So he asked my mother to wait in the car, and he walked out of the car and he followed us till the entrance of the airport. Now, at that time, the police came and told my mother that she cannot park in that place because that was a drop zone only. So she had to move. So my mother thought that she would go one round around the airport and come back to pick up my father. So my mother went one round. My father was not there. My mother went another round. My father was not there. My mother went the third round. My father was not there. And please remember, all this happened before the era of mobile telephones. So none of us had mobile phones. From the side of my father came out. He waited for he came to the same place where my mother was. She was not there. And so he started walking up and down the airport to find where she was, whether she had moved in the front or back. So he started walking up and down to search for her. So while my father was searching back and forth, and while my mother was driving around the airport 3 times, they could not find each other. So my mother thought, rightly, that maybe my father had already gone home and she left for home. Correctly, my father also decided that, okay, maybe mother went back home, so he will also go back home. And he took an auto rickshaw to go back home. Now, when he came back home, my mother had not yet reached home. The house was locked. And my father suddenly realized he had no wallet. The wallet was in the car with my mother. So my father explained to the auto rickshaw driver, sorry sir, I don't have money. My wife is going to come from the airport, and he explained to him what happened. And he said, please wait. The auto rickshaw driver said, no problem. I will wait, sir. Don't you recognize me? I will wait, and I'm actually worried about you because I will wait for you until your wife comes so that you are inside the house. Normally, rickshaw drivers are not so nice. Sometimes they get very impatient and they want to go get their next business. Especially it was a bit late in the night. But the auto rickshaw driver asked my father again, sir, don't you recognize me? Don't you recognize me? My father said, no. He said, oh sir, I was a young boy when my mother was working in your house as a maid. And you and your mother, that is my grandmother, you were really taking very good care of my mother and you were feeding us very well. And my father used to be not so nice. He was drunk and he was beating us and all that. And you and your mother, you really protected us. So I feel a lot of gratitude for you. So I will wait till your wife comes. Make sure you are safe and you are able to go inside the house. Don't worry about money, sir. That is not so important for me. So this is what is the concept of adrishta janma vedaniya. You do something good. It doesn't mean that the result or the consequence will also come immediately. It will also come maybe later. The same way, you do something bad, it doesn't mean that the consequence will only happen immediately. It can come later. It applies for both. It was one of the most beautiful stories, real life stories that I've ever witnessed with my father. And when he was sharing that to me, I was so happy. And he would always say, my father would always say, when this can happen for good things, it can also happen for bad things. And that's why we have to be very careful, especially with the bad things, because we may not be able to connect the dots. Why bad things are happening? So many people ask the question, why something bad is happening to me? Patanjali's answer is, hey, something is happening because some time in the past you did something wrong. But that's where the word is very powerful. Drishta, adrishta, janma vedaniyaha. By using the word janma, Patanjali is saying sometimes the Kleśa-s are transferred even through generations. What bad karma you may do need not affect only you. It can come in the next generations, perhaps in your child's generation, in your grandchild's generation. That's why we have to be very careful, because our actions are not just influencing us, but also future generations. And this is a very important thing that we have to reflect on at this moment in our world history, because many of us in the world today, we are driven by materialism and the Kleśa-s. We are driven by avidya, raga, dvesha, abhinivesha, and most importantly, asmita. And these will have consequences. Every action that we do today will have consequences. If not in our lifetime, it will affect our future generations, our children, our grandchildren. And this is very important, because we are not just responsible for our lives, we are also responsible for others' lives. In modern times, we are all talking about individuality, independence. We are not individual, we are not independent. There is always a collective consciousness that is working. We are dependent. We don't grow all our food. We don't earn all the income without other people. We are dependent on each other. We may be having independence over some aspects of our life, but we are not completely independent. And this is very important for us to realize, because every action we do has consequences, not just for us, but for the others in our lives, not just now, but also later. That's why the word janma is used. Some commentators interpret the janma to be multiple births, what you did in your past life, what you did in your life before. So for those who believe in reincarnation, this extends also in past lives and future lives. So this is very important reflection for us, because Kleśa-s do not always have immediate consequences. Kleśa-s sometimes have long-term consequences that affect future generations, that affect our future. That's why this sutra is very important warning that Patanjali is giving us. This sutra has not been given because he is bored. Patanjali is saying to us, deal with the sutras, because if you don't deal with it as early as possible, it will affect you greater and greater later. And the more we allow the kleshas to accumulate, the more suffering we will have to deal with. Think about it. When a disease is very small, it's easier to deal with. When the disease becomes very large, it's very difficult to deal with. The same holds for the kleshas. When the kleshas are very small, deal with it. That's what Patanjali says. Te pratiprasavayaha sukshmaha dhyanahiyaha dadvrittayaha. And if you don't deal with it, it will start manifesting in large effects later. And sometimes you will be so shocked, it will be a surprise. And that is why, my friends, this sutra is very, very important. Klesha mulaha karmashayaha drishta adrishta janma vedaniyaha. The fundamental essence of this sutra is that if we allow kleshas to be the source of our actions, the consequences of such actions will be known immediately or later when you least expect it. So Patanjali is saying, please don't act based on the kleshas. In the future sutra, he will also clarify, sometimes intention is important. Now you may hurt somebody without intention, but that is not klesha. No, you may say or do something that hurts somebody, but if your intention was not to hurt somebody, that is not a klesha. And so you will not suffer from that consequence, and the other person must not feel hurt from that consequence, because it was not really your intention to hurt. But if it is your intention to hurt, that is coming from kleshas. And that is where Patanjali says here, Klesha mulaha karmashaya drishta adrishta janma vedaniyaha. This is the essence of this sutra, my friends, and we will continue next time. Namaste.